Error. Electricity in line. Override accepted. Infusion initiated.
Welcome to the INS Infusion Room, the official podcast of the Infusion Nurses Society. In this podcast, we explore all things infusion therapy through a real-life conversation, covering the latest trends, new research, evolving standards, and key industry insights. Whether you're an experienced infusion nurse or new to the field, we aim to keep you informed and empowered with the knowledge to stay at the forefront of the profession. My name's Derek, and I'm your host. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another episode of the INS Infusion Room. Today we have very special guests MiKaela Olsen and Blake Shay, and we're discussing how nurses and pharmacists can work better together. Before we get started, I do want to make mention that this episode is sponsored by BD, and BD is also the proud sponsor of Season 2 of the INS Infusion Room.
Hi, Mr. Storm. I'm your nurse, Sarah. You're in the ICU. You're safe. You're not alone. I'm here to help you get better.
Every nurse knows that quiet moment, the pause to double-check, protect, and make sure everything is right for your patient. And pharmacy feels the same responsibility, ensuring every order, every dose, every detail supports patient care at the bedside. But even the strongest teams can be disrupted by technical complexity and stressful delays. BD Alaris Infusion System can help change that. As the only system designed to simplify and safeguard infusion practice on a single platform, it streamlines workflows and prioritizes safety in every moment, helping nursing and pharmacy move in sync so teams can focus on what matters most, the patient in front of them.
What we've enjoyed with working with BD is the opportunity to implement technology that supports us every step along the way. From the time that it enters our door at the pharmacy department in the hospital and transit, occurs throughout the hospital or to our clinics and finally makes it to the bedside, we have a good deal of BD support end to end.
Welcome to the studio. If you don't mind, give a brief introduction about yourself and maybe your experiences.
I can go first. I'm MiKaela Olsen, and I am the clinical program director for oncology for nursing practice for our cancer service line at the Johns Hopkins health system. And so I oversee many outpatient infusion areas across the system and inpatient beds. A lot of my work is harmonizing practices across the health system. And so this topic has been very near and dear to me. It's something that I've been working on for a number of years and for actually almost a decade. The other thing, fun fact, is I've been a nurse for 36 years and I was an Army nurse for the first part of my nursing career.
36 years of nursing and still staying strong. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And what about you, Blake? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Blake Shay. I currently oversee pharmacy services for BayCare St. Joseph's Women's and Children's Hospitals. In addition, I also oversee the pharmacy aspects and administration of our hemophilia treatment center at St. Joseph's. And then part of my role is also similar to MiKaela's, but helping with standardization of all of our infusion areas from the pharmacy perspective on our campus, and that includes adult as well as pediatric infusion services.
So you both make mention of having similar backgrounds and project scopes. So talk a little bit about, if you don't mind, the background of how you got into what you're doing now and why you have the passion to help nurses and pharmacists better understand one another's workflows.
Well, I think for me, I got involved in this work when we were harmonizing our pumps and tubing across the health system. And I realized that sometimes the need to avoid hazardous drug exposure and the restrictions with different pumps and tubing capabilities were intersecting and actually conflicting. And the nurses were challenged with being able to provide the full dose of antineoplastics and other small volume meds to patients I was very concerned, and I was concerned for patient safety, and I was concerned at all the workarounds that nursing had to do. And then when we actually looked into the why of it, we found that nurses had multiple challenges regarding how to give drugs safely and accurately, including how to flush them, how to account for the overfill, air in line alarms, lots of different problems. And so some of those problems that nursing was facing, we really stemmed from how the drug was delivered to nursing from the pharmacy. So I went backwards and started engaging my pharmacy colleagues in the problem, and they were not aware that all of the drug wasn't administered, and they were not aware of our challenges. So that's when the relationship really came together. We started putting our heads together to come up with ways to ensure full delivery of these drugs. And I think that was where a decade of partnership with my pharmacy colleagues. And then Blake and I met at different conferences and things, and we started just talking about these issues, and Blake and I had the same brain about it. But, I always say I have now started to have a pharmacy brain, and Blake now started to have a nursing brain. So we think very differently in the way we work, but we're such great partners when you bring those two interprofessional groups together.
What about you, Blake?
Sure. I mean, I think this is such a good question. I think the passion for this, um, similarly, but on the pharmacy side, came from just being a pharmacy leader, overseeing, as I mentioned, women's, children's infusion services, and really working really closely with our nursing teams every day. And so that helped me see firsthand, we have to get together. We have to work together. Nurses and pharmacists are really deeply committed to patient safety. We're often trained to think about medications from different angles, but both are important. And then pharmacists are going to be focusing on the drug selection, preparation, regulatory compliance, safety standards. Nurses are managing the real-time bedside workflow, patient needs, timing, administration challenges. So, when those perspectives don't really fully align, it creates frustration. Not because anyone's wrong, but because we don't really understand each other's constraints and priorities. And so that was really um, kind of a passion for me in the last 18 to 24 months, because I saw the disconnect. I saw of what MiKaela had kind of brought to light. I saw that we in pharmacy were thinking we were doing everything perfectly, but it's really only perfect if nursing is on board and vice versa. And that really leads to a perfect med use process.
And I think a lot of that is, correct me if I'm wrong, but understanding each other's processes. So I'm sure you both can relate with having your personal workflow nuances. So what is it that you'd wish when you were looking at these projects, the other team to know more to, or have more transparency to regarding your workflow nuances?
Yeah, for me, I realized that pharmacy had restrictions in how they could compound and send the medications out. We were also asking them to prime the tubing for us, and then there would be frustration when there was an air bubble in the tubing, or something happened incorrectly in the pharmacy to introduce air into the tubing. The pharmacy didn't understand how the overfill in the bag affected our ability on the nursing side to infuse the drug over the prescribed amount of time. And so those were the things that once we brought that to light in the pharmacy, it was like an aha moment. They said, "Oh gosh, well, how can we work with you better to make sure that we don't ever we minimize air in the tubing if we're priming it for you, and that we can get the volumes on the drug label to be as close as possible so that you can predict how much drug is in that bag and give it over the prescribed duration." And those were probably the two things that were items that I wanted them to understand better.
And I think from our end, the pharmacy end, the nuance I really wish everyone had greater visibility into is the complexity of some of the regulatory aspects of medication preparation. And so it involves multiple regulatory upstream steps, which are the clinical order verification, the review, building the labels, and building the orders and the EHR. And then the overfill constraints that MiKaela just mentioned, all the compounding requirements with 797 and 800. And so I think all of these nuances really are important for pharmacy to partner with nursing on to understand, because I think this is the key that leads or does not lead to frustration or the perception of delays or workarounds at the bedside, is that, it's not as straightforward as medicine out of a vial into a bag and through a window. There's just so much more that's going on in that pharmacy. And so I think we've done a good job at our site, but I think this just needs to be, brought to light a little bit more in other departments.
Yeah, and on the nursing side, I was not aware until I started studying and learning about this that every manufacturer's IV bag of saline or whatever, the pre-manufactured bags, fluid bags, every manufacturer has a different amount in that bag. And they're allowed to be, what is it, like within 10% of the actual volume, but that could be significant. And so when you're infusing these drugs, if you don't account for overfill or do that accurately, it's a problem.
So you mentioned challenges. When you came together, what was your personal plan of attack? What was your game plan to make changes within the organization?
Yeah, for us, what I started looking at two really important things. I looked at chair time in all of our ambulatory infusion sites where we give hundreds and hundreds of doses of antineoplastics and pre-meds every single day across the health system. And luckily, we have a system in place that is called Lean Toss that we're able to use in our healthcare system to monitor chair time. What was the expected chair time? What was the actual chair time? And so I started looking at that data and wondering, why are we not matching the predicted times and why are they all going over? And then as I was doing that, we don't have pump interop yet, so I wasn't able to look at it from that lens. Maybe Blake can talk a little bit about how he did that. But I was also able to run reports from Epic and see the start time of drugs and the stop time of drugs, and they didn't match. So if the duration was supposed to be an hour, the start and stop times were often longer. And then going back and interviewing nurses and doing observations, I found that there were multiple strategies among nurses, all differing about how they got or tried to get the drug in. And none of them resulted in the drug going over the prescribed time because they had to do things like go back in and program more volume because there was still tubing left behind in the drip chamber or the tubing itself, which, as Blake and I have studied now, that can be a significant amount of volume, and it can actually significantly impact the amount of drug a patient gets, which could affect their outcomes. And that's really scary. That was really scary. And so using chair time, using start and stop times, I saw lots of discrepancies. I also saw that because chair time was extended, it was causing bottlenecks and it was extending out the whole clinic day, which meant that nurses were staying late, patients were staying late. And one interesting discovery when I was in the room doing rounds, a patient said to me, every time I come, my treatment's supposed to last for an hour, but sometimes it lasts for an hour and 10 minutes. Sometimes it lasts for an hour and a half, and I've even had longer. So that showed me that there was variation in how we were infusing these drugs. That's how I discovered that we need a novel strategy to figure this out because we don't have awareness about the problem. And more in Blake and my world in oncology, the drugs are smaller volume. Back when I was a new nurse, we didn't really worry about this because we were giving 500,000 cc bags of chemotherapy. If you left behind 20 in the tubing, it wasn't a giant problem. But now some of our drugs are, what's the smallest one, Blake? Maybe 25, 50. I mean, if you leave 25 cc's of that in the tubing, you've significantly impacted that patient's chance of getting a response or a cure.
Yeah. And I think so similarly, I mean, especially on the pediatric side, some of the doses are only 25 mLs. So, I mean, that could almost be the entirety of the dose if it's not administered correctly or the overfill is not accounted for. So just really important. And so I think from our standpoint, our starting point was really acknowledging that the workflow was flawed and that there needed to be a fix and that, we don't know what we don't know. And we have to stop acting like we're the experts of everything because we're really only the experts of the drugs and compounding. So there's a whole other aspect that we have to learn about, and that there's not going to probably, because we have pediatrics and adults in the same population in the same site, there's not going to be a one size fits all solution, at least in our campus. And so we had to know that early on and know that any meaningful change would require a partnership with nursing. And in building our plan, really had to, very similar to MiKaela, but direct observations of the workflows, looking at pump programming. We do have Cerner and we do have pump interoperability at our site. So we have a lot of data at our fingertips. So also worked with our pump vendor to pull the data off of the pumps so we could really study start, stop times, flush times, and some of the rate calculations and recalculations that we were seeing being done. So we paired that with chart audits and we're able to really evaluate the delivery patterns and also the compounding patterns. So what drugs had overfill, what drugs didn't within the pediatric and adult populations. And then with that, really then designing a practical, safe process that minimized drug and line waste, the workarounds we were seeing, the recalculations we were seeing. And then that gave us kind of a platform and a foundation to then begin to work collaboratively because we had identified all the problems.
I was going to say also on the nursing side, I have grown to appreciate the complexity in the pharmacy with all of your standards and everything that you have to do and why it takes so long to compound drugs and how you can't compound them together and batch things necessarily. And especially when it comes to antineoplastics. And then on the nursing side, we struggle with does the line require a filter and how do I prime that filter and how do I use that filter safely and appropriately per the manufacturer guidelines? What are the compatibility of the drugs? How do I have to flush in between because of compatibility? And then knowing whether the tubing needs to be primed with drug or not, or if it's safe to put a benign substance in the tubing, all the hazardous handling requirements, of course, how to do the flushing safely. And then all that with whatever pump my organization has, and we have lots of them across the country, and in the world. So everybody's using different pumps and different tubing. And sometimes you're really restrained by what that manufacturer has and what you can work with. So that's why I think one of my passions and Blake's is to make sure that manufacturers develop novel strategies so that we can get the drug in over the right amount of time without exposing ourselves and accurately. And I don't think we're there yet. I think manufacturers need some nudges to figure this out.
And just to add on that, I think this seems rudimentary of work together and get along and, talk about your problems and figure them out. But it really was eye-opening to see how many of our pharmacists, you talk about primary lines, long lines, secondary lines, 5 sites, short primary sets, and you start really digging into everything that a nurse has to know and manage during a 30-minute, 60-minute infusion. And, we truly have a knowledge deficit. So, MiKaela and I have tried to take our learnings, our partnership and share that either through publications or presentations. And some of the feedback we get from national organizations is this doesn't resonate with our membership. And it's kind of funny because it's well, it doesn't resonate because it's a different perspective that they actually need to know about.
Right.
And so it's something we continue to kind of battle.
That's our dinner talk is tubings.
I like that you said perspective, because this is what I think whenever I hear you both talk about this. It is truly a perspective from our lived experiences within our professions and our skill sets, right? Our scopes of practice. So thank you both for those examples. I think it really outlines the complexities within both of our professions and how we have equal contributions to patient safety. If we're looking at contributing to a plan of attack, which you guys mentioned, at some point there's an alignment between the professions. So when that alignment occurs, what changes first?
Well, I think first thing is that those relationships build, right? And I think that's the most important part. I remember many times over the years where nursing was frustrated because they didn't have drug and the patient was waiting and things weren't going smoothly. And the first response is always, well, the pharmacy's delayed. But actually, if we are partners and we understand each other's challenges and we understand when one of the hoods goes down and they're not able to compound as quickly, or they had a pharmacy tech call out, or they have a runner call out, that we're going to have delays. And we are gracious and patient with our pharmacy colleagues, just like they would be with us if we had nursing challenges ourselves. And we do, in my organization, we do a morning huddle at 8:15 every morning, rain or shine, every day of the year except the major holidays. And pharmacy and nursing are on that huddle as well as many other interprofessionals. But we bring our issues for the day to that huddle and we let each other know we're down 2 nurses, we're down a pharmacist, we're down this. And it really has helped. So I was going to say relationship building. And then I think after that, I would say what you align is, or the benefit you get out of working together and figuring out these problems. You get fewer interruptions, fewer late doses, your clinics finish on time, your chair time is more predictable, you have reduced wait times, less rework. When I ask nurses sometimes, how many times do you have to go back to the pump to be able to reprogram that extra volume that you see hanging in the tubing, even though the pump said that infusion was done? Sometimes nurses say 2 or 3 times they have to reprogram that pump. So that you can reduce that. And then more time for patient care then, because you're not having to go back in and do all this rework. And then less stress in high acuity situations. I think ultimately less risk of having an error.
Yeah, and I
Absolutely.
think, I think MiKaela mentioned probably every point that I was going to bring up there. But, I think alignment,
You took the words right out of your mouth.
You were thinking
yeah,
the same.
I think, I think I'll talk a different perspective. I think the outcome of alignment and things that we look for is we implemented this project. And I think what we ended up seeing was, there's a lot more trust between the teams. We moved one of our pharmacists, directly into a nursing station. And they, the nurses like loved it. They were like, "Oh my gosh, this is the best place to put a pharmacist. They're right next to us all day." So I think just all of those working relationships really improved because it wasn't, where's the drug? Keep asking pharmacy about overfill. We're doing rework, we're doing workarounds. So I think that was more of an outcome of what alignment should look like. And then, I think one of our kind of like aha moments was after we finished this project and implementing these short primary sets and reducing some of the drug-in line waste, one of our nursing leaders got on one of our leadership calls and said, one of our biggest wins for 2025 was this project. And that was like
That's great.
unsolicited. I'm just listening to the call and I was like, wow, so um, we're not trying to win awards, but this is, it's always good when it comes from someone who's not a pharmacist, not a pharmacy technician, that there was something meaningful that came through a partnership with pharmacy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Changing the culture is very challenging within an organization, but it sounds like you're breaking down those silos and really focusing on what that culture looks like within these workflows. So kudos. That's hard work. It's very challenging work. Talking about your wins, I would like each of you to share maybe a small or big win that came from your work that was associated with giving time back
Yeah. We're going to have the same answer. I just imagine it right now. But
You're in unison.
I think that instituting a new way of delivering these small volume drugs that's not a secondary tubing set where you have to do the back priming and go back in and program more volume, and then you have the head height differential issues. Doing a short primary set, which I hope more and more pump manufacturers will come up with, allows us to run that drug over the exact duration of time and run it dry to the air chamber, so that we can then use the primary line to flush it through. And I think to me, that was really key to the success of this project, is designing a way to do this that nurses felt comfortable with, pharmacists felt comfortable with, everybody understood. And it's novel in that we haven't always given drugs using this technique, but it's really cool. And anyone can manufacture a tubing set like this. And so I'm hopeful that more and more people will start to learn the different ways you can give things and start to move away from some of the traditional ways that are full of potential errors.
Are there any additional tools that you could make recommendation to that makes efficiency better within the workplace?
I think to give a different answer, but I totally agree with MiKaela. But I think, to gain efficiency, I think the knowledge, sharing the knowledge with both teams on, specifically from pharmacy, the tubing setups. And I think when we were going through the education process for implementing our short sets, I think it gave our team just a much better perspective on, as we mentioned, everything that nursing has to understand. And, even if we only know 5 or 10% of it, and we just know the basics of connections and number of channels needed and some basics on pump programming, I think that just goes such a long way in that relationship, helping kind of improve efficiency in your infusion center.
So we talk about the tools. Let's talk about the individuals who make those tools. How can we work with manufacturers to harmonize those workflows?
Yeah, I think it goes that way too. We have to educate the manufacturers on our challenges and why some of their products may not be working efficiently for us, and what our clinical challenges are, what our patient safety challenges are. And through that work, if they're a true partner, then they have their R&D people and their engineers that can think outside the box and really work with us, the clinical people, to solve problems. And I think that's what we need. And, not to have them just say, well, this is how it works and this is how you need to use it, but actually be creative with us.
Yeah. And I think that partnership with, whatever vendor it is, ensuring, it's always better when the vendor has multiple pieces of the puzzle, because I think being able to, it's much easier to have the conversation of, hey, you have these 6 pieces and let's just get them to work better together, than trying to work with multiple vendors and then get everybody on the same page. So, I think, it goes back to the partnership piece, but also just, understanding where you're sourcing your tubing from, your pumps and everything else, and just trying to be consistent.
So do you have anything that matters most when you're looking at that relationship with a technology partner?
For me, are they at the elbow, available pretty quickly when you need them to be? And do they follow through when you report problems or defects? And are they just that responsiveness?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think it's the responsiveness, it's the service, um, and I think it's the ability to make changes quickly, because realistically, that's what matters the most, because everything happens so fast in healthcare.
Yeah. There can be just a little minor something that changes on the manufacturing side that makes that product have a deficiency suddenly that we never had. There's a leak. It's not clamping on correctly. There's some things happening with flow of the infusion or the pump. And that can literally be traced back to some change that occurred on the manufacturing side that if they quickly investigate that, they can get that product out of out of this circulation and help us and find a sub for us in the meantime or whatever. And we've all experienced so many shortages and out of stock issues that is what we need from a company, is somebody who's going to quickly, and not just say it's user error, right? I've heard that.
Right.
Your nurses must be doing that. And I'm like,
They don't know what they're
no,
doing.
these nurses,
Educate.
these nurses have been doing this for 10 years with this same product, and this never happened. So it's not us. And if they take ownership for that, I always admire that.
So as we wrap up today's discussion, do you have any final words of wisdom to our nurses and pharmacists that may be listening, or maybe other clinicians that could benefit from what you have to say?
Yeah, Blake gave me an idea earlier that another thing that I like to do is teach the pharmacists about our vascular access devices, because that's another area where they may not know what's the difference between the port and the PIC and the midline, and why can't we give that drug through the midline, and why do we need a PIC, and all these. So I do a class on that for the pharmacists, and they just love it. And then we extend that to extravasation and infiltration, and because giving these drugs also requires that we know if they're vesicants, and we need full dose delivery, but we also need to safely give it to the patient through the right vein. So that's a whole nother complexity of what nurses need to be expert in, which is so hard. I mean, it really is a lot that we have to know. And yeah, that's
a good one.
Yeah. And I would just say, go back to what I mentioned earlier, but you don't know what you don't know. So get out of your comfort zone as a pharmacist and figure out how to get out to a floor and how to see a pump, see a infusion setup, know where your drug goes, right? And so don't just take pride in making a bag, or making a hazardous drug or non-hazardous drug, or knowing everything about USP 800. I think take that next step and teach nursing, teach them about 797, teach them about 800, invite them in your pharmacy, right? Have them gown up and see the hoods, have them, really understand what's going on every day. And I think that is just going to go a long ways with the relationship building.
exactly.
Great advice. I love both of those. But thank you both for being in the studio today. This was a great discussion. It really shed some important light on the subject. And it's always great to hear the different perspectives and have that interdisciplinary approach to patient care. That's how we're most effective. So thank you so much for coming in. And as always, I'm your host, Derek, and it's been a pleasure sharing this important discussion with you. Remember, knowledge empowers us to make informed decisions. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and keep getting knowledge. Thank you for tuning in.
Infusion complete.